Since it IPO'd, it's up 53,000%.
Wow.
That's ridiculous.
Yes. When Warren turned 50 years old, he was worth $100 million. More than 99% of his wealth came after the age of 50. It took Buffett more than 50 years to reach $500 billion in value at Berkshire. And then it took less than 10 years to go from $500 billion to $1 trillion. We're going to ask the big question as Warren Buffett turns 94 years old. Will Berkshire Hathaway's superpowers survive Warren Buffett?
Hero or sidekick?
Welcome to Sidekick, the podcast where we uncover the hidden superpowers that drive some of the biggest and fastest growing companies and successful names in the world of business. My name is Bryce, and I'm joined by my regular co-host and sidekick, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. When did I get demoted to your sidekick?
I don't know. We're your sidekicks.
I thought together we were sidekicks, and together we are going to uncover one of the most amazing business stories of our lifetime.
I know.
A company that is chock full of superpowers. Today we are looking at Berkshire Hathaway.
Yes.
We're going to look at the company and the superpowers that drove its success. We're going to also look at the superpowers that drove Warren Buffett's wealth. And most importantly, we're going to ask the big question as Warren Buffett turns 94 years old. Will Berkshire Hathaway's superpowers survive Warren Buffett?
So let's start with what is Berkshire Hathaway for those that have never heard of this company before. Listed on the New York Stock Exchange, the ticker is BRK. It is Warren Buffett's investment company.
Now, not to nitpick, but there's actually two tickers.
Yes.
BRKA
Yep.
and BRKB.
Yes.
BRKA trades at about $680,000 a share.
Unbelievable.
BRKB, a much more reasonable $500 a share.
Yes, much more accessible.
Now, Berkshire Hathaway is the first American company outside the technology sector to reach $1 trillion valuation.
It has made Warren one of the richest men in the world. It is a giant in the insurance game. It has railroad businesses. It has energy businesses. It also has major shareholdings in a number of other corporations. So you can think of Berkshire as three parts. The first is operating businesses that it owns 100% of. The second is investments where it's a minority shareholder.
Yep.
And then the third is its insurance operations, again, where it owns 100%.
Yeah, now before we unpack the story of Berkshire today, we want to go back to the beginning. And this story doesn't start when Berkshire was founded. It starts in 1965 when Berkshire is already at 126 years old. It is a textile mill in Massachusetts, and it is struggling against the forces of globalization. Because really, after World War I, the US textiles industry started to face stiff competition from overseas, and it really started to struggle. In 1962, a young value investor started buying shares in the company, believing that the share price that Berkshire Hathaway was trading at was lower than the liquidation value of the company.
Meaning?
But basically, if you sold all of the assets of Berkshire Hathaway, it would be worth more. You'd get more money back than the share price was then at that time.
The ultimate value buy.
That young fund manager was Warren Buffett, and that was his investment philosophy back in those days. He was trying to buy things for less than they were worth. It was called a cigar butt style of investing. He didn't care how good the companies were. He just cared that you could buy $1 for 50 cents. And this young fund manager was buying and buying and buying. Eventually, he had a 49% stake in Berkshire Hathaway. And that brings us to 1964, where the CEO at the time, Stanton, made an oral offer to buy Warren Buffett's stake in Berkshire Hathaway. He offered $11.50 a share for Buffett's shares. Buffett said yes.
Jeez, what could have been?
Well, a few weeks later, Buffett receives that offer in writing. But the offer isn't at $11.50 a share anymore. Stanton has offered $11.37 a share. Buffett got angry. And instead of selling at that slightly lower price, he wanted the original price, the $11.50 a share. So he decided to buy more stock and take control of the company, go from 49% to above 50%, to take control and to fire Stanton, which is exactly what he did. But once his anger subsided and he'd fired Stanton, what he was left with was a majority stake in a failing textile business.
Wow, what a story. What a story. So this brings us to superpower number one, Ren, which is the man himself, Warren Buffett. At this point in the story, Warren was 35 years old. This wasn't the first investment that he had made. He already had a pretty strong investment track record. From 1957 to 1968, the Buffett partnership, which was his investment vehicle, had earned a 31.6% annual return with no losing years. This is phenomenal. In the years since, he has continued on, and according to Forbes, is now worth $146 billion and is number 6 on the rich list.
Yeah. Now, to put that 31.6% annual return in context, Buffett in the years since, so 1965 to today, has done about 20% a year return. The S&P 500, the 500 biggest stocks in America in that time, has done around 10% a year return. So to do 30% a year is pretty incredible. Well, I mean, it is incredible. Yeah. And so as we unpack the superpowers of Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, we can't overlook the biggest one, which is the man himself.
The man himself.
There's a reason he's his generation's best investor, probably history's greatest investor.
Oh, arguably. I think he started investing when he was 11 years old. So by the time he hit 35, he'd had 25 years under the belt. So at this point is where the real Berkshire as we know it today was born. Yeah. And I say as we know it today because Warren, as you said, was faced with a majority ownership and a flailing textiles business, which he then began to use as the corporate vehicle to invest and grow his wealth. He started moving capital into other industries, starting out mainly in insurance, National Indemnity in 1967, and then Geico in the late 1970s were probably two investments that have formed Berkshire as they are today. And in 1985, the last of the textile operations component of Berkshire was shut down.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned insurance there. It's probably worth pausing for a second because the second superpower that we really need to understand in this story is insurance.
Yeah.
And what we really need to understand is float. So, when you think about when you pay for insurance, car insurance, home insurance, health insurance, whatever it is, you pay your premiums first and then you claim them later. And sometimes much later, sometimes not at all.
Absolutely.
But in between the time that we pay for our insurance and we claim on our insurance, the insurance company holds our money. That's called the insurance float. And the insurance company, to an extent, can do what they want with it.
Yeah.
I mean, they can invest it. And that is the point here. They can take that money and make a return on it as long as they've got enough money to pay out claims as and when they need to. And so Buffett took that money and invested it better than anyone else could and had. And that was really the money that he used to grow Berkshire. And so as we look at the story of Berkshire, both first from National Indemnity to Geico to moving into reinsurance, where that Berkshire is now the biggest player in offering insurance to insurance companies. That is really been the fuel for their investment success. That's how he got the money to make the investments that he became famous for.
What we would do for an insurance float.
Well, I mean, like if you look at insurance companies today, they all have it, but no one invests it like Buffett does. You know, like QBE, Suncorp, they just buy a lot of bonds and some blue chip companies.
So superpower number 2, insurance, and then superpower number 3 was Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger. Now, Charlie Munger was, I think, Buffett's lawyer at the time, or was a lawyer.
Was a lawyer, yeah.
And Buffett convinced Munger to join him at Berkshire Hathaway as his vice chairman in 1978. Now, this really was a fundamental shift in the way that Warren approached investing, because at the time, Warren had really taken from his mentor, which was Ben Graham, which was buying cigar butts, essentially like really cheap, beaten down, undervalued companies and just buying them on valuation.
Yeah, the classic example is if Superhero Sidekick podcast owned $1 million worth of land and it was trading on the market for $500,000.
Yes.
Like that was what he was looking for.
Without so much of a tilt towards it being a good quality business, he was just looking for really cheap businesses.
Yeah.
Munger came in with a slightly different view that shaped Buffett's thinking as it is today, which was to buy good businesses at great prices. So forget looking for shitty businesses at really cheap prices. Let's try and find better businesses at more reasonable prices.
Yeah. And really, we put those three superpowers together. Warren Buffett himself as an investor, his partner, Charlie Munger, and then the insurance float. And those three superpowers are really like the foundations of Berkshire's success. So from there, we can take a quick look at 59 years of investment success at Berkshire Hathaway. So these are some of the more famous investments that Warren and Charlie made over the years. So we mentioned National Indemnity Company. That was the first real move out of textiles into insurance in 1967. 1972, he buys See's Candy. 1973, he first invests in the Washington Post, the newspaper. 1976, Geico Insurance. As we get into the 80s, 1988, he first invests in Coca-Cola. 1989, he invests in Gillette, the razor company. 1990, American Express. 1995, he just buys the rest of Geico. In 2000, he invests in Moody's. Also in 2000, he buys Mid-American Energy. In 2010, he buys the railroad Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. 2011, he invests in Bank of America. 2013, he buys Heinz and he merges it with Kraft. 2016, he invests in Apple. And 2019, he invests in Occidental Petroleum. Now, for people who are really familiar with the Buffett story, some of those company names and investments probably ring a bell and stand out. We probably don't have time to go into them all now, but I think it's just it's a story of consistently investing in companies and then letting those companies grow for decades.
Yeah, I mean, he still holds almost all of them. Or at least a position in some, if not buying out the full lot. And I think that's a big lesson I've taken from him and we'll get to it later, is the true compound effect of some of these. It's also worth pointing out, yes, these are not all of his investments, but I think we've named about 15 there or so, 15 notable major ones in almost 60 years.
Yeah.
There's not a list of 200 plus investments that we're reading out saying notable. And I think that's another lesson of his, is you don't need to swing at everything. So yeah, some decent, he's done pretty well.
Yeah, he has done well. I mean, like the Coca-Cola investment stands out because his cost base, what he paid for the shares in 1988, he now gets paid more than that in dividends each year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Like that is the power of finding a great company and holding it for the long term.
Yeah, $24 a second in dividends, I think, or maybe $24 a minute is what he earns in Coca-Cola.
Okay.
Fact check me on that, but it's quite substantial.
Yeah. I think before we talk about Berkshire today, we need to acknowledge what is perhaps the most powerful superpower that any investor can have in their arsenal, something that has helped every investor that has done well in the stock market. Every investor that has built meaningful wealth has used this superpower.
And it's available to everyone.
It is, and it's free.
It's free. Well, yeah.
And that's time.
That's time. That's right. Did you know more than 99% of Warren Buffett's wealth has come after he was 50 years old? I think there is no truer story than of compounding than Warren and Berkshire Hathaway.
So when Warren turned 50 years old, he was worth $100 million. Not bad. That's a pretty successful life. You would take that. He's now 94 years old and worth $145 billion. More than 99% of his wealth came after the age of 50.
Yeah.
And it's not like he became a much better investor.
No.
That is just an example of the power of compounding, where if you earn a consistent rate of return, so for Buffett, around 20% a year, and every year you have a bigger investment base on which you're earning 20%, the numbers start to get massive in the out years.
Yeah.
I mean, even Berkshire itself, the company, is a story of compounding. It took Buffett more than 50 years to reach $500 billion in value at Berkshire, like for the company to be worth $500 billion. And then it took less than 10 years to go from $500 billion to $1 trillion.
Yeah. The company has, since it IPO'd, it's up 53,000%. Berkshire.
Wow.
That's ridiculous. Sorry, just sidetracked there. Let's put some numbers to this, Ren. So if you go to the Money Smart Compound Interest Calculator website, we can throw in $100 a week. Compounding annually at 10% for 30 years gets you $857,000. If we change that 30 years to 40 years, you can really see what you were just talking about, Ren. You go from $857,000 to $2.3 million. You've added another 33% in time, but you've added another 168% to the return.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. That is the power of compounding and time in your investments.
Yeah. I mean, you blow it out from to 50 years, use your same numbers, and you've got 6 million. So it's like the extra time that you add, you get an outsized return. That's what we're trying to illustrate with this example, and that's what Warren Buffett's life illustrates. There is no better superpower than time when it comes to building wealth in the stock market or really in whatever asset that you're investing in. Now, other investors have earned higher returns than Buffett.
Yep.
Jim Simons, the founder of Renaissance, he earned 66% a year. He averaged 66% a year for 36 years. Peter Lynch averaged 29% a year for 13 years. But neither of them are in the Forbes top 10 billionaires list. Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway has averaged 19.8% a year for 59 years. And it's the power of time. We're going to keep saying it over and over again because anyone listening, wherever you are as an investor or as a business person, like this compounding effect is so powerful. And really, it's what has got Buffett to where he is today.
It's incredible. Where will it be even 10, 20 years' time is going to be fascinating to see. Superpower number 5, Ren, is the American Tailwind. Now, it's undeniable that Warren Buffett chose a pretty good time to start investing. Many of his investments rode the American economy story and globalization. Think about some of the investments that we've spoken about before. Coca-Cola, Gillette, American Express, getting into these businesses at an ideal economic time.
Yeah. So I think there's some of the superpowers that we really need to pull out from this story. But the question becomes, what is Berkshire today? And sadly, Charlie Munger has passed away. Warren Buffett is 94 years old, and he won't be with us forever. And so the question we want to answer is, does Berkshire's superpowers, will they outlast Buffett? Now, to understand what Berkshire is today, it's that 3-part structure that you introduced earlier is still how that business operates. It's got a number of business units that are majority owned or 100% owned by Berkshire. Then it's got a number of minority investments where it's buying shares just like you and me. And then it's all powered by this insurance business and the float that it generates. Now, in terms of the business units today, there are sort of 7 major ones. There's
massive.
Insurance, which includes Geico, its primary insurance business and its reinsurance business. There's Pilot Travel Centers, which it fully bought in 2023, which operates travel centers across North America, 750 travel centers across 44 states and also in Canada. Think of it like Flight Centre in Australia.
Yeah.
Manufacturing, it's got a number of manufacturing businesses. McLean, which is a big wholesale food distributor and convenience distributor. Service and retailing is basically a catch-all. It's got everything from fractional aircraft ownership to media businesses, logistics businesses, home furnishings. And then the final 2 business units that are really worth paying attention to, it has Berkshire Hathaway Energy, which is one of the big energy players in the US. And then it has Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which is the largest freight transportation railway in the US.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought they got into healthcare as well. Didn't they try to with...
So Amazon, JP Morgan and Berkshire tried to do a health insurance company together, but that folded.
It failed.
Okay.
Nice.
So in terms of revenue, the insurance business is 24% of revenue. Pilot travel centers and manufacturing are both 19%. McLean is 14% of revenue. Service and retailing, 10%. Berkshire Hathaway Energy, 7%. And then the railway business is 6%.
Yeah.
In terms of profit, the insurance business is 34% of profit. Pilot travel center and manufacturing, both 21% of profit. McLean, 1% of profit.
Yeah.
So 14% of revenue, 1% of profit. Yeah. Service and retailing, 9% of profit. Berkshire Hathaway Energy, 2% of profit. And then finally, the railway business, 12% of profit.
High margin.
Yeah, so 6% of revenue, 12% of profit for the railway business.
Boost that.
But I think really that the takeaway from all of that is that it's very well diversified and like really across the North American economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They churn out profit, $40 billion in operating earnings, and a giant in some of the divisions that you spoke about there, Ren. The railway, they are the largest freight railroad in the United States, and their energy division serves 4.9 million retail customers and is the second largest owner of clean power generation in the US after Next Era Energy. And their insurance is the third largest property and casualty insurance company in the US, according to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. But the thing that always stands out, and a lot of people draw out every reporting season, is how much cash they are sitting on. Yeah. They sit on a whopping $277 billion of cash and cash equivalents on their balance sheet. Everyone asks them year in, year out, what are they going to do with it? Why aren't they making investments? Warren sticks to his guns and says that he doesn't think there's many opportunities out there that are worthy of deploying the money. So he's sitting on a whopping pile.
Yeah. I have a theory about what they're going to do with that cash, and this might be me putting the tinfoil hat on, but Buffett's shares are worth about $150 billion, call it. I think they're setting themselves up to do the ultimate stock buyback because otherwise what do you do with Warren's shares? After he dies, like, you know, if you donate them to charity and then the charities try and sell them down, then that puts selling pressure on. You don't want to do that to existing shareholders. No. But if the company buys the shares back, that benefits all existing shareholders, liquidates Buffett's estate, and then he can donate that money to charity.
Yes.
There would be a tax bill potentially, but, you know, Buffett loves paying tax.
He does. He loves it. Says it every.
So that's my theory.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty decent one.
Yeah, I think it's quite elegant. It solves a lot of problems, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we are here to answer as we close out this episode is, will the superpowers that we've spoken about today survive Buffett's death? What does Berkshire look like after he leaves the company?
Well, obviously Warren won't remain, so we can tick that, cross that off. Insurance will remain. That's one of the superpowers that we spoke about. It's not going to go anywhere. I can't see management making any drastic decisions. It will remain. Yeah. The powerhouse that is Berkshire will remain, and by that, the wholly owned businesses that they have will remain powerhouses. Railway will remain the largest freight railroad in the US. Insurance will keep its position, and they will remain the second largest, if not get to the largest owner of clean power generation. Who knows?
Maybe. I think the cash on the balance sheet obviously will remain unless they do this big buyback, and I think that will give future management a lot of optionality in terms of investing in existing businesses, buying new businesses. But obviously the thing that will not remain, as you mentioned, is Buffett and Charlie Munger. And so what they have been so good at doing is capitalizing on growth opportunities, be it investments in shares and taking minority stakes in businesses, or buying businesses outright, or using their balance sheet to do new and novel things around reinsurance and everything that they have done, which has created so much value. You'd have to assume that the future leaders of Berkshire don't perform at that level. And so I guess as we think about what Berkshire will look at post-Buffett and post-Munger, our conclusion of what the most likely outcome is, it will remain dominant, it will remain a $1 trillion company, but for the last 60 years, it's grown at 20% a year. And you would assume that that growth rate slows down and it kind of comes back to the average and comes back to the pack as its management comes back to the average. And so maybe you would think in future it grows at a rate similar to the S&P 500, maybe around that 10% mark rather than 20% mark. But I don't think the dominant franchise that Buffett has built isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
No. Well, he'll certainly be studied for many a year after he has passed away. An incredible story. So just to recap there, Ren, the 5 superpowers that we touched on, Warren Buffett being the first, the insurance float, partner in Charlie Munger, the value of time and compound, and the American tailwind that he was able to take opportunity in. But that kind of brings us to the end.
Yeah.
So if you're interested to learn more about how to grow your wealth like a superhero, head to superhero.com.au/registration. Otherwise, subscribe to Sidekick wherever you're listening so you don't miss an episode. But that's it from us, your trusty sidekicks. We'll be back uncovering more superpowers in the next episode.